Broadcasting from the Any Hour Services podcast studios, I'm your host, Mike Wilson, and you're listening to In the House. For those of you who are new to the show, In the House is a podcast about the major systems in the house: electrical, plumbing, heating, air conditioning. Each week, I'm joined by a panel of experts, and we pick a topic and we discuss it in depth. It's meant to be informative and hopefully bring you some value. We're starting to spend a whole lot more time outdoors, working around the house. And so in this episode, we're actually going to be talking about electrical safety outdoors, things you need to watch out for, and how to avoid accidental shocks. I've got Shane and Troy joining me today. They're the management team of the electrical department at Any Hour Services. How you guys doing?
Doing great.
Doing great. Thank you.
Awesome. So with us spending more time outdoors, we all know that electricity powers our lives, and it's awesome that way, but it is kind of dangerous. And so when you're outdoors, there's more likelihood of you being in contact with water. And so safety is really important when you're talking about electricity outdoors. Troy, why is water and electricity so dangerous together?
Well, water will actually conduct electricity, so you can get shocked if it runs through the electricity, the flow, the path of electricity. Quick example, I was squirting down my garage, inside of the garage, not on the outside, with water.
You were spraying water inside your garage.
Spraying water inside my
normal?
garage. The door, I don't know if it's normal.
But it's dirty in there,
I was spraying it out.
Your wife was like, clean the garage, and you're like, where's the water hose?
That's right. It's the easy way, right? Anyways, there was a light switch above me, and I actually just come across that light switch, and I got zapped from the water going into those lights, right? The power conducted electricity and zapped me. The first time I did it, I was like, oh, what's going on? And so I was like, I got to do that again. And
so wait, it zapped you when you were spraying the water or when you touched the light switch?
No, when I was spraying the water.
That quick,
It conducted through the electricity and zapped me.
Wow.
Yeah, I was surprised.
That's interesting.
But yeah, it got me pretty good.
Huh.
The second time. The first time was just
a
like,
little buzz?
Yeah.
And then you were like, well,
Yeah,
let me
let's try it
figure out
again.
what happened there. And then you're like, oh, yep, that's electricity.
Yeah, it was.
Interesting.
Coming good. But yeah, so we got to be careful and mindful of that
Yeah.
at all times.
Let's actually talk about some recommended electrical safety, like the best practices. Now, there's codes that are in place, but codes are really there for safety items, right? I mean, they're there to keep us safe. So let's talk about some of the safety things in our electrical that should be there when we're working outside. Shane, you got any?
So first of all, we should always have a breaker connected to our power. That's just very, very basic. And next, you talk a little bit about GFIs. That stands for Ground Fault Circuit Interrupter.
Okay.
They've been in code since about 1971.
Okay.
They started out as just protecting outside places. Since then, they protect kitchens, bathrooms, garages, downstairs basements that are unfinished.
So talking specifically about outdoors, you said that there should be a breaker. Any circuit that's outdoors, does it need to be a GFI breaker, or can you run the circuit to the first location and put in a GFI outlet?
So you can do it either way. They make breaker versions of a GFCI, and they also make plug versions.
Is one better than the other?
No, they both.
You just need something.
Something.
Got it. Is it what's most common? At my house, outlets, or GFI outlets are what I've got. But are breakers? How does someone know if they have a GFI breaker or a GFI outlet?
The only way you can really know is if you physically see the breaker or the plug, or else you have a tester that can test for a GFI circuit. They have little testers that you can buy. They have a little button you can push once you plug them in, and they'll trip. Other than that, there's no way to tell if it's GFI protected. Gotcha.
So those testers we've talked about before, they're not that expensive, but there's a tester that plugs into an outlet, and there's a version that has a button on it that can simulate the ground fault, and there's a version that does not have the button. If you're going to get a tester, it's best to get the one with the button. It's a couple more bucks, and it's totally worth it. You can plug it into any outlet, whether it looks like a GFI outlet or not, and you can push that button, and you can tell if there's GFI protection on that particular outlet. Yep. So that's a good one.
So when you do that, it'll actually trip the GFI,
yes,
or it'll trip the breaker. So understand knowing where that is important, because if you trip that and you don't know where it's at, you can't reset it.
That's a good point. The number one thing, make sure it's protected, but then know how to reset that thing and restore power.
Yes.
So outdoors, do they? I mean, where the most common places, obviously a GFI breaker is going to be in the breaker panel. It could be on the main panel outside if it has breaker slots in there, or it may be in the house. For GFI outlets, is there a common place? Is there a common practice when you're installing those outside? Do you usually install one at each location, or do you do one and protect all of the outlets on the house? What do electricians usually do? Give somebody a common place to look for a GFI outlet.
Well, there's a couple
outside.
I'll be honest with you. A lot of times when you have an unfinished basement, they'll come off an outlet there, which is a GFI, and run to the outside outlets that are GFI protected. But the actual GFI is down in the basement. So
that's a good point. So if you have an outlet that stops working inside or outside, and you look for those GFI outlets, and let's say you do know enough, and you're like, oh, it's GFI protected, there's probably a tripped outlet, and you look everywhere outside, then go and look for a tripped breaker a tripped outlet inside, because it could be protecting those exterior outlets.
Unfinished basement. Yep, we see those a lot.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good tip. Okay, so what are some other safety best practices outdoors? Well, we actually, I'll bring one up. We talked about the GFI outlets, weatherproof covers / in-use covers. I know back in the day, you just used to have a weatherproof cover that had a piece of insulation between the cover and the outlet, and it had a little door that would open up. And then as time went on, they created what's called an in-use cover, or a bubble cover, where you put it on the outlet, and the purpose is so that you can plug an extension cord or something into it, but it sits way further off from the wall, because you want to be able to plug it in and have that lid be able to close and still use the outlet. Why is that, Troy?
Oh, keep it away from weather and from the water, stuff like that. Keep it isolated.
So when you have an extension cord plugged in, I mean, especially if it's an exterior outlet, I mean, if you're not intentionally spraying it with a water hose like Troy, you could have sprinklers that hit it. I mean,
timers are always plugged into those, and so you can actually there's a little knockout here on the bottom that you can go knock that out, right? Run the extension cord up here and then close that, and so now it's isolated from the weather and protects it.
What kind of timers are people plugging in there?
Sprinklers, lights, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
There's an in-use one that's got a timer on it. I've seen in several locations where you can just set it for the time, and then on and off whenever you want, multiple times throughout the day, through the night, that kind of stuff.
So if your timer is, because I know for our timer is plugged in the garage. And so those outlets in the garage don't need an in-use cover on it. But if the outlet is installed outdoors, it does need to. It's recommended that you have an in-use cover on it. My house is like really old, and it was built in the 30s, and at some point they put an extension on the house and they added an exterior outlet, but it has that old style, just flip up door. We just shot a video the other day, last week, and I was showing how to install an in-use cover, essentially, because I didn't have one out there, and it is a good idea to have that. So let's see. Shane, you mentioned extension cords before the show. Talk to us. What do people need to know about extension cords, or what do they need to look for? Because I think a lot of people, I mean, you've got more electronic lawn tools, you've got trimmers, you got mowers, I've seen chainsaws that are electric, all of those things that you plug in. What do they need to look for on those extension cords to make sure they're safe?
Well, first of all, examine your extension cord. You want to make sure there's no fray and there's no cuts in that. You can actually pick up an extension cord that has a cut in it, and it'll actually shock you. You've got metal parts sticking out of some of those. So first of all, make sure your extension cord's in good condition. If it's not, throw it away. It's not worth getting shocked over. Also, look at the ends. On the ends, that's where a lot of the fraying or the breaking happens quite often, right where you plug it in. So right where that little end plug is hooked on.
It'll start to come apart. You start to see the green and the white and the black wires in there.
Yep.
And so if you're seeing that, you're saying that should be replaced?
It should be replaced. They actually sell ends that you can put on yourself, but if you don't feel safe doing that, just go buy a new extension cord. Also look at the ends. There's most extension cords now are 3-prong. You have a hot, a neutral, and a ground. And make sure all 3 of those prongs are on there. If your ground's missing, that's your protection.
Yeah,
So-
I'm not going to say that I have seen people take a pair of pliers to pop off
I have.
the ground. I have too. I was trying to protect the innocent there. I guess not so innocent, but yeah, that's people do that because they look at a plug and they're like, oh, there's not 3 prongs. Oh, I know how to fix this. I'll just pop that off, because the ground doesn't necessarily have to be there for the electricity to flow to make the thing work. It's there to protect you in case something goes wrong. And so, yeah, don't pop that ground off of the extension cord.
Yeah.
Another place I would just take, if you got a pair of gloves on or something, or bare hands, like, don't just check the ends. Run the length of the extension cord and look at it, because whether it got run over by a car or pinched in a door or run over by the lawnmower and it didn't necessarily cut all the way through, or maybe you hit it with the weed eater. There's if it's got a nick in it, it's best practice is to replace the thing. Where is the line between the outside protective coating of the extension cord has a nick? Where's the line between wrap it with electrical tape and replace the whole cord?
I would always go on the safe side. If you've got nicks and stuff and you don't feel comfortable fixing that yourself, just buy a new one.
Okay.
If there's a little tiny nick in there, you could wrap it with electrical tape, but still, you're always taking that chance.
Mm-hmm.
Also, one more thing to look at an electrical cord is making sure that the sizing of the electrical cord is right.
That's a good point.
If you go to the store, you're going to see some electrical cords that are pretty cheap and then some that are pretty expensive. Most of that is due to the size. So you can read on the electrical cords what they're good for. Are they good to run a big motor? You don't want to run a big motor on a little tiny cord. They're not made to do that. It's also bad on the motor also. So make sure you're buying the right cord for the right application.
Yeah, they'll have a 14 gauge, 18 gauge, 12 gauge extension cords, and like Shane said, you will pay for the 12 gauge extension cord. But man, if you're running 100 feet and you've got a motor, if you're not paying attention to that, you will damage the motor, whatever you're running.
One of the most common applications I think of for that is if you've got like an RV or something that you're plugged in and you're trying to run the generator or run it off the house power. You need a big, thick 10 gauge plus extension cord that plugs in there.
Yeah, voltage drop is real. They allow you up to 3%, and then anything above that, it starts doing damage. So, one other thing too, the actual plug. Examine the metal pieces that you're actually plugging into the outlet, and I've done this myself, where you're putting tension on that extension cord and it tweaks a little bit, and now it starts arcing, and so those blades actually, you'll see they start pitting and stuff like that. And so, man, if you see that, go ahead and replace the end or the extension cord.
So look for little black marks or little holes in the end of the metal pieces that actually plug into the receptacle. Okay. Let's see. Another thing that a lot of people are doing, actually, before I get to this one, as you're walking around outside in the spring and working in the garden and working around the house, look for exposed wires, whether that's on your sprinkler timer, whether that is on the meter. A lot of times what'll happen is the ground will settle and the pipe coming up from the ground will pull away from the meter and you see exposed wires. That's not good to have. Or on your electrical, or not your electrical, your air conditioner, that's another place that whip coming from the AC disconnect to the thing, it gets rotted in the sun and the wires can start to be exposed there. Those are not good situations to have. You may want an electrician to come out and fix those. Digging in the yard is something that we do a lot, whether it's in the garden or you're trying to put something in or just digging a hole because you're bored. I don't know why you would do that, but if you do. So what are the steps? What does someone need to do if they are planning on digging anywhere in the yard?
Well, Blue Stakes is a great resource there. Give them a call. They'll come out and actually mark all your power lines coming to the house.
How much does that cost?
It's free. It's free service. Absolutely.
So if you are, now it differs from state to state, but if you're listening to this and you live in Utah, you can either dial 811 or you can go to bluestakes.org. That's the color blue, BLUE, and stakes, STAKES.org. And you can schedule those appointments to do that. But like you said, they come out and they paint where the gas is, where the water is, where if there's electricity there. How deep does someone need to dig before they can hit electrical lines?
Sometimes it's a couple inches. You don't know what the guy before you did. So as you're doing these projects, think ahead too, because blue stakes won't get there the day you want to do the project. You've got
That's
to
a good point.
give them 3 or 4 days advance notice. So whenever you're digging, give them that notice to get out there, because if it's a day of, you're not going to get them there. But like I was saying, they could be anywhere. You just don't know.
Okay. Better safe than sorry. Don't just go digging holes. Other things we talk about, I mean, obviously you've got power lines outside. When can those become a hazard to people? Because they're supposed to be installed up high, where you can't just like go grabbing onto them or swinging them. But what are some circumstances where you can come in contact with power lines?
Trees. Kids climb up trees, right?
That's true.
Oftentimes we see those power lines going through trees and around trees. And so if you're up playing in the trees, man, whoever can grab a hold of those. Up on the roof. Also, they come across roof lines there. There is codes and regulations, but again, still you can reach and touch those power lines. And so be very cautious and careful. Always look up when you're climbing.
That's a good point. And, it's a good idea especially if you've got grandkids coming around, or if you've got kids that are curious and able to climb trees, it's a good idea for you as the responsible adult to go out and identify if there are any trees in the yard that have power lines, and then identify those to your children. Do not climb this tree, so that's a good point. Let's see, down power lines. What should someone do if they ever have a down power line in their yard or around the house?
If you have a down power line, call 911.
Okay.
Get somebody out there as quick as you can, but don't go near it.
Okay.
Don't even come close. Some of those big power lines can get you when you're not even real close to them. So whenever they're down, call 911, and that's always best practice.
That's true. The electricity being able to jump from one spot to the next is a real thing. That arc jumping in the sky. Just don't be the person that is the least path of resistance, and you all of a sudden are conducting the electricity. If you have a tree limb that is hanging on a power line, don't try to move it or adjust it. Get the professionals out there. Don't take any risk.
Hey, also too, just with that power, 911 is a great resource, but also you can call the power company.
Okay.
Rocky Mountain Power. Let them know, hey, once you've called 911. Obviously, if there's a down power line, you want to call 911 first, and then.
So is that the protocol? Call 911 first, and then the power company.
Yeah, and then the power company.
All right. So let's see. So that's the main safety things when you're working around the house. There's not like a ton of stuff to go over. It's really just use some common sense and be smart when you're working with that stuff. I'm curious, Shane, what are some things that we have electricians get called out for? What are some things that you've seen, maybe projects outside electrical projects that you've seen DIYers try that they didn't quite get right? What are some things that you can do outside that you really got to make sure you do it right?
Well, you can do everything wrong, but no, a lot of the stuff we come across, we go to a lot of hot tubs that are hooked up wrong. They don't have GFI protection, so you're sitting in this big pool of water, and you're sitting in water. That's kind of scary. They're using the wrong sized wires. They're not burying wires deep enough. They're not using the right size when they're going to different things. And we do a lot of stuff where, it's just, we see everything.
Okay. Go ahead.
One thing that I've seen a lot on older homes and even newer homes is exposed Romex, right? People will just run Romex that's meant to be in walls on the outside.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and so make sure you're using the proper conduit and that kind of stuff to protect that wire.
So just because this wire will conduct electricity doesn't mean that it is best for that particular application.
That is correct.
Because there are things that Romex is rated to be inside a wall where there is no sun, there's no UV damage, there's no extra heat from the sun, like all of that, the stuff. And so you can't necessarily just put it. I've seen somebody string, when I was installing some satellites dishes, I saw somebody string from their house to, like, I think at one time it was a detached garage, but they were using it as like a house, and they had strung a Romex from like one part to the other, like you would string a Christmas light or something. I think they actually had some Christmas lights attached to the Romex as well.
Jeez.
It was interesting. And like, Yeah. It's the thing is like they'll plug it in and it'll work and it'll do what they want. And they don't understand just how dangerous it is. And if you try and point those things out, like it's sad when people aren't scared enough of it, but you don't want to be labeled as somebody just coming out there trying to, use fear as a tactic to try and get work done. But I mean, we have a responsibility to point those types of things out,
Electricity is very dangerous. It don't take a lot of amperage to go through the heart to actually kill somebody. And so we have to be mindful and respect electricity. So yeah, absolutely, Mike.
So we talked about hot tubs, but I mean, we got landscape lighting, exterior speakers, flagpole lighting. There were some other things that you were listing, Shane. What are all those different outside services that we do that sometimes people try on their own?
So we do a lot of low voltage landscape lighting, circuits to GFIs, like we talked about, wiring to hot tubs, powers to outdoor sheds and garages, post lights. We do lights for flagpoles, water features. So we do a lot with pretty little water features. RV outlets are becoming a lot more popular where they can plug their RVs out on the outside. Heat tape, a lot of heat tape outlets outside. Christmas outlets, automatic gates, anything that takes power outside.
Generators are a big one, and so that's the thing is like I get people trying to save money and do some of this themselves. And if you're going to try and do a bunch of the labor yourself to try and save money, mazel tov, do that. But consult with an electrician beforehand so that you make sure that you are at least doing it correctly and so that it's going to be safe, or do it and then have somebody come out and check it. I would recommend have somebody consult with you beforehand, because if you run the wrong size conduit and you bury it and you try and pull a line through it and they're like, oh, nope, that's not going to work.
Cost you more money in the long run.
Right. So, I mean, electrical outdoor safety isn't too complex. Is there anything else that you guys want to bring up before we kind of wrap the show up?
One thing, going back to trees, make sure that we're trimming those and they're not going over power lines. Just to touch on that, during the winter when we get these storms, we see those branches come down and knock down meters and power lines. And so again, when you're outside, be mindful of that.
So if they're trimming trees, that's not something that, if you have limbs by a power line, is that something you can call the power company and they'll come out and do that for you?
In some locations they will. Other locations they'll charge you for it. So it depends on kind of your jurisdiction where you're at.
So trim the trees before they get to the point where they're involved with the power lines, huh?
Yeah,
Well, sometimes
just be mindful of that, because man, that gets expensive. And then you lose power. Usually in the middle of the winter, it's cold. It's not fun to not have power in the home. We've seen a lot of those.
also when you're planting trees, watch for power lines above, because these little trees get big. So watch where you're planting.
Well, that brings up a good point. I guess if you're going to dig a hole to plant the tree, in theory, you should have called blue stakes, but you probably don't want to plant a tree over top of a gas line or an electrical, conduit or something like that. But all right. Well, anything else?
Nope, I think that's it, Mike.
Well, that was a quick one, but it was good information there. So that's the show today. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of In the House. We'll be back next Tuesday with a new episode. If you've enjoyed the show, man, I can't talk for anything today. If you've enjoyed the show, do me a favor, go to iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a review. Let us know what you think of the show. If you've got suggestions for us, we'll read those as well. I'd like to thank Troy and Shane for taking time out of their busy schedule and coming and being the guest on the show today. Cam for co-producing back behind the scenes, and everybody else behind the scenes that helped make the show possible. If you'd like to know more about Any Hour Services, visit anyhourservices.com. I've been your host, Mike Wilson, and you've been listening to In the House.